Hello, everyone. Welcome to Teaching with Magic, a podcast exploring the intersection of education, fantasy, and literacy. Here at Teaching with Magic, we explore the different ways that teachers in the fiction and in the real world make magic for their students. You'll hear discussions about teachers and teaching methods in fantasy, science fiction, and pop culture. You'll hear interviews with scholars in various fields about important topics in education, and you'll get to be a part of an ongoing conversation about why the imagination matters. Welcome to Teaching with Magic.
Hello, listeners. Thank you for joining us today. I am your host, Elise Trudell-Cedeno, and today we're boarding the Hogwarts Express. We're talking about teaching in the Harry Potter series. I'm joined today by Potter scholar Lana Whited, who has taught several courses for college students and high school academic summer camps. Lana Whited edited the first collection of essays on the Harry Potter series, The Ivory Tower and Harry Potter, in 2002, as well as a critical insight series volumes on the Harry Potter novels in 2015 with Katherine Grimes, as well as the Hunger Games trilogy. Dr. Whited is director of the Boone Honors Program and professor of English at Ferrum College in Virginia, and earned degrees at Emory Henry College, the College of William and Mary, Hollins, and UNC Greensboro for her Ph.D. She has received the Exemplary Teaching Award from the Council of Higher Education of the United Methodist Church and was a 2016 nominee for the State Council of Higher Education of Virginia's Outstanding Faculty Awards. Her most recent book is Murder in Fact, Death and Disillusionment in the American True Crime Novel. Lana, welcome to Teaching with Magic.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to talk with you today. And I also wanted to add that if it were about 2 weeks later, I hope my most recent book would be a follow-up to the Ivory Tower volume, which is called The Ivory Tower, Harry Potter, and Beyond. And it is a collection of essays about all the works of J.K. Rowling, including some that really have not received much in the way of critical attention in terms of literary scholarship. The Casual Vacancy, The Cursed Child. My own essay in that volume is about the Ichabod, which is a book I like very much. The Fantastic Beasts film series. So I'm really excited about that and looking forward to seeing it.
Excellent. You said that's coming out in 2 weeks?
I think the official publication date is December 22nd. So we'll see when it turns up in my mailbox. Should be soon.
There you go. Hey, Merry Christmas. And you also have an essay in the most recent Potterversity essays on the Harry Potter series that was edited by Dr. Katie McDaniel and Emily Strand.
Yeah, I kind of think of Katie and Emily and also Louise Freeman as my marauders. You know, I said this actually in the preface to the new edition because we work together so frequently, and I think, you know, the very best thing, Elise, about being in Harry Potter studies is all the people that I've met along the way, all the friendships that have developed, including you, of course. And, you know, it's just been so much fun to meet people and be involved in their lives. And I do think that Potter studies is a really fertile kind of area for that reason. As I've said to you before, it's deeply weird to have written an essay about the film series when it has now been aborted, and it doesn't look as though, you know, there'll ever be a fourth and fifth film. My essay is about a theme that I saw developing in that series concerning the alignment of the Phoenix with Albus Dumbledore and the alignment of the dragon with Grindelwald. And I distinctly remember a moment in the second film when Grindelwald was talking about that vision of wizarding supremacy, and he exhales that blue smoke, and I thought, oh my gosh, she's a dragon. And that I mean that idea really occurred to me that quickly, and then I started looking into the mythology of the dragon and phoenix, especially in Asian folklore, and the significance of that is that the most fortunate thing is when the dragon and the phoenix occur together. So the interaction of, you know, Dumbledore and Grindelwald obviously is very important. I was really hoping that series would continue to the point that we get to see that confrontation over the Elder Wand in 1945. So still hoping that might happen at some point. I guess you never know.
You really do. You really never know. And even if it doesn't happen on the big screen, I'm sure there are people out there who will take it from a fandom perspective or from a fan fiction perspective and continue it, because that's something that's really prevalent in the Harry Potter series as well, is taking the series itself and making it their own when the work of the author is not particularly satisfying, at least
Absolutely.
in certain
Yeah,
respects.
I
Yeah.
have not spent very much time looking at Harry Potter fan fiction, and that's something I really like to do.
Yeah, I know there are quite a few scholars who do, and I know Amy Sturgis, as a fandom studies professor, is really good at that as well. And I've talked with Amy Sturgis about Star Wars fandom, but not too much about Harry Potter fandom. But let us start from the beginning, as it were. So, what subjects do you teach, and can you describe them for us, or for those who might be unfamiliar with your discipline? What's your subject? What do you teach, and how do you teach it?
I actually spent the first 20 years of my career at Ferrum teaching journalism for at least half my load. I was the coordinator of the journalism program and advised the campus newspaper. And that's frankly why I got hired at Ferrum, I think originally, because they were looking for somebody to do that. But for the most part, I've always taught writing courses. My Ph.D. specialization is in 20th century British and American literature. I've never really taught British literature to any great extent, except for a novel here and there in a novel course. The novel as a genre is one of the areas in which I'm really interested in. I have taught novel courses at Ferrum. But when the Harry Potter series came along, around that time, I audited a children's literature course on our campus taught by my colleague, Tina Hanlon. And that was really the beginning of my interest in children's and YA literature. It is not something I studied in graduate school. And even though I got certification, teaching certification as an undergraduate, I don't ever remember taking a children's literature course or a YA literature course, and that's sort of remarkable to me. Most of what I teach at Ferrum includes writing courses, and I also teach a couple of seminars in our honors program in addition to directing it. My truly relevant course to our conversation today is a course called Harry Potter and the Hero Myth, and I've been teaching that course now for about 15 or 16 years. Mostly I teach it in the classroom, although occasionally I teach it online through a consortium that Ferrum belongs to. Just finished teaching it the fall semester. And we do not read all the Harry Potter novels. Students are kind of surprised when they come into the course to find that we're not going to go through each of the Harry Potter novels. We typically read Prisoner of Azkaban, which I think is probably my favorite. I think that's a lot of people's favorite of the novels. But we also... reading list changes, but we always read Gilgamesh. We always read The Sword and the Stone. We always read the Epic of Sunjata, which is a West African hero myth. And we watch a film version. Sometimes we have read the text, but more often we watch a film version of a hero story called Hongil-dong, which is Korean. I include that work in the course because I had an exchange student one semester from South Korea who chose that work. One of the assignments I use in the course late in the semester is to ask students to choose a hero myth of their own and apply the theory that we've discussed in the course. And that includes things like Joseph Campbell, of course, Otto Rank. We talk about the tragic hero and have a lecture about characteristics of the tragic hero. I ask them to choose some of the theory and then to apply that to a hero myth that they choose. And this young man talked about Hongil-dong, and I realized, largely because I didn't have an Asian example in the course, I started including that work on the syllabus. And it's a Robin Hood story. It's about a young man. I'm not sure whether you know it or not. It's about a young man who's second son of a kind of a regional governor. And as the second son in a very hierarchical culture, he's really persona non grata. He's expected to go out and make his own way in the world. His mother is a concubine, so she has low status in the household. There are actually a lot of similarities between the Hongil-dong story and the Epic of Sunjata, because Sunjata also is the son of a woman who's given to his father as a prize. These hunters come along and they have this woman who's called the Buffalo Woman, and she's been given to them as a prize. And so she becomes Sunjata's mother. And Sunjata, like Oedipus as a child, doesn't walk well. He has some foot deformity and doesn't walk until about the age of, it's probably 7, because 7 is always the magic number in hero stories. And I think that's about the point when he actually begins to walk. And then, and this is a historical hero myth, like the story of Gilgamesh. And then he becomes the founder of the Empire of Mali. So I like having those examples from other parts of the world. I think in the early years when I taught the course, too many of the texts were works that were originally written in English. And I've tried to diversify that a little bit. So yeah, but that's the most relevant course that I teach at Ferrum to our conversation today.
And I also remember listening to an episode of Potterversity where you were invited to talk about arithmancy, because that's a subject that you taught in like a high school camp on Harry Potter. Can you talk a little more about the high school camp as well?
It wasn't even high school, it was middle school. It's fun things I've ever done in my life. Yeah, I think, as I mentioned before, I did have certification when I finished my undergraduate degree. And I've never taught on a level below college other than my student teaching experience. But if I did that, I would definitely want to teach middle schoolers, because I find that at least until about 8th grade, they're still really enthusiastic and their hormones haven't kicked in yet. And they haven't really started to be terribly preoccupied with their love interests and all that sort of thing. And I just really like that age group. So the camp, this was a camp on our campus that went on for, oh gosh, I don't know, over 20 years. I taught in it probably about 10. My course was called Hogwarts Academy. The campers were rising 5th graders to about 7th grade. And so they were, for the most part, I guess 10, 11, 12. A few of those campers subsequently came to Ferrum College and were 4-year students, and that was kind of exciting. A few of them I'm still in touch with today. In fact, during the pandemic, I recorded a podcast with Katie and Emily. It was a Potterversity podcast. It may have been Reading, Writing, Rolling then, but we recorded a podcast, and I invited one of my Ferrum students and 2 young people who had been in that summer program. We talked about, because those students were currently either in their final year of college or their final year of high school. We talked about their experience of having their final year abbreviated in exactly the same way that Harry, Ron, and Hermione do in Deathly Hallows, and how being fans of the Harry Potter series had really informed their thinking and their feelings about that experience. And it was really great to have those students whom I had initially met when they were in, 5th or 6th grade as 18-year-olds or 21, 22-year-olds, looking back on that experience. But anyway, what we do is for 1 week, 5 days, we essentially play Hogwarts. We have Hogwarts style classes. One of my colleagues in chemistry would always have a potions class. And so that was one of each day during the week, we had a particular class. And we also did wand making and several other things. I particularly liked teaching ancient runes, and I liked having students make themselves a set of runes. The class actually operated on 2 levels. It became so popular that some students would come back for subsequent years and they would want to take it again. So I used the concept of owls and newts to kind of distinguish the 2 levels of that class. So the students who were taking owls were doing the required Hogwarts subject, and they're the ones who had potions and history of magic, and I tried not to be as boring as Professor Benz, and charms. We would talk about the Latinate nature of some of the names that Rowling uses for charms. So that was the owls class. And then the newts class, the students had elective subjects, and those are the students who had arithmancy and ancient runes and care of magical creatures and those other subjects. That's about the most fun I've ever had in a classroom, I will tell you. I mean, it was really fun. And unfortunately, it stopped when the pandemic began, and it hasn't resumed because the person who directed it for many years retired. from the college. But it was a lot of fun. And students were taking lots of other classes at the same time as well. My course was just one of their 4 courses during the day. So they might have also been taking crime scene investigation or cooking or French or, one of the other courses.
But clearly yours was the fun one. That's clear to me. Yours is your course was the one that really got them thinking, and you made a magical setting for them. And the courses you taught are clearly, these are things that bridge into our Muggle world, and chemistry, potions, they go together. Care of magical creatures, you're learning about what was it, like at a bestiary, like an ancient bestiary, or like current animals. I mean, those things, they all go together, and clearly it was memorable.
Yeah, and it was a lot of fun. It was surprising to me how much those students really wanted to live the Hogwarts experience. I mean, they came to camp and brought their house robes and wore their house robes to class. We played Quidditch. That was probably, for me, that was probably about the best part. We went out at least one day during the week and we all played Quidditch. And that was an activity for the camp that everybody came to watch. All the other campers came to, kind of be the spectators. And that was really a lot of fun.
Yeah. Quidditch, it's real. People, I mean, we see it when we go to Chestnut Hill, don't we? There are actual Quidditch matches. So what is it about fantasy texts that you particularly enjoy teaching? What is it about them that speaks to you and the subject area that you teach?
I think fantasy is the most subversive genre. And I have heard lots of people talk about the force of the imagination as being the most important force in terms of changing the world, solving problems. And I really find that students who are really exceptional, and as an honors director, I deal with a lot of students who really are exceptional. One of the qualities that really seem to set them apart from other students who are solid students, earning an undergraduate degree and successful students. One of the things that really sets exceptional students apart is the quality of their imagination and their ability to kind of think outside the box, to use a cliche. And I think fantasy literature encourages that. Part of it is that we don't necessarily have to think in terms of the kinds of things that can realistically happen. We always started out in my Hero Myth course, we start out by talking about what magic is, and why we call certain kinds of things magic, why we call wizards, which involves necessarily talking about science and how we process the kinds of things that defy the laws of nature. So I think it's the emphasis on imagination that attracts me more than anything else. But it's really interesting for me. I mean, considering that I've devoted now probably 23 years of my life primarily to Harry Potter studies. I mean, I think that's the way that I'm primarily known as a scholar. It's interesting that I didn't really grow up as a devoted reader of fantasy. I mean, I watched The Wizard of Oz. I never read the novels. I read Alice in Wonderland. I read The Secret Garden, which is not really fantasy, I suppose. But, I for the most part, I was a reader of more realistic kinds of fiction. So this really is an interest that I have come to as a middle-aged adult, and wasn't really preoccupied with when I was a young person myself. And that's interesting to me. But it's also interesting to me how magical elements in fantasy stories intersect with real life. And I think The Sword and the Stone is a good example. I talk with students about why T.H. White decided to retell the stories of Arthur in the immediate aftermath of World War II, and why he was thinking about power and how power is exercised and the mistakes people can make in using power. Why The Lord of the Rings is essentially, I mean, in terms of its composition, contemporary to World War II. So I think it seems to me like the imagination in those works is really critical to solving the problems that face those protagonists, which for the most part are real world problems. They just exist in a different format in the real world, I think.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. The imagination is, as you say, that's how we get innovation. That's how, we solve problems, is by applying our imagination. And that's something that our students need to learn to develop. Absolutely. You've taught for several different age ranges. You've taught the camps, you've taught for college students. What are some of the similarities and differences in your approaches to teaching fantasy? And what are some of the different ways that students interact with and react to the subject material?
I will say for me, it was a lot more challenging to teach the middle schoolers probably than it was to teach my traditional college age students, because, I already knew how to do that. I mean, for one thing, I kind of have them as a captive audience. I mean, there are certain kinds of guidelines in place that prevent them from getting out and walking out of the room in the middle of the conversation. But for the younger kids, I mean, what we did had to be a lot more active. It had to be a lot more experiential, and it had to move a lot faster. And I was always faced with the problem on any given day. I would kind of have a plan for that day, and then I would have 2 or 3 extra activities that I could give to the kids who finished everything I had planned for us to do in 3/4 of the time, that we were supposed to have to do it, because it seemed like the kids were always moving at different paces. And so on some days we would have times when they could work on various things. As I mentioned, we made wands, and we couldn't do that all on the same day because we had to wait for paint to dry and glue to dry and things like that. So we would always have some time during the class when students could do one of a number of things, including I created a kind of library in the room. Even at the beginning of the time that I started teaching the middle school course, I had a lot of Harry Potter, ancillary kinds of resources myself, John Granger's books, and gradually books by other people and readers' companions and things like that. So there were some students who would want to pick up those and read in every opportunity. Some students wanted to borrow books and take them back to their residence hall and bring them back later in the week. And I don't think I ever lost a book during that time. But the younger students really, we had to move faster. I had to have a lot more kinds of things planned. It was really a lot more challenging, I think, for me than teaching the college students, who typically tend to be sophomores, although I do get students who are juniors and seniors in the course. We don't have a specific literature requirement at my institution anymore, but we used to. And when we did, my course was one of those that met that requirement. And a lot of students would take that immediately as sophomores once they finished the freshman writing requirement. But some students put it off and take it later on. But that course really felt a lot more typical for me because it was more like the other courses that I teach. Although I've had students come to the college course in their house robes as well.
Yeah, got to have the house robes. Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
I'm curious how the hero's journey, it seems to come up a lot in your work, and it comes up all over fantasy. That's such a prevalent theme. Why do you think that particular framework is relevant to our students today? Why do we keep coming back to the hero's journey, do you think?
Well, there's the intersection of literature with psychology, I think. I think it's because of the prevalence of that archetype. It's like the question, why are there over 800 variants of a story that we in the European tradition call Cinderella or Ashpuddle, a story about a girl who lives with typically a step family or someone who's not her biological family, who are not particularly nice to her. Harry Potter really is a Cinderella story in a sense, or a Cinderfella story, I suppose. And who then is recognized as being something that this family he or she has grown up in has not recognized about that person. I think the primary appeal of that pattern is psychological. When you think about it, almost all heroes are common. Many of them are small. Frodo's a hobbit, for example. Bilbo's a hobbit. And people who think of themselves as initially unlikely to be able to achieve whatever it is they're challenged with. Campbell calls that the refusal of the call. It's like the scene in which Frodo says to Gandalf, why did this have to happen in my time? Why couldn't it have happened in some other time? It's one of my favorite scenes in all of literature. Same thing happens with Moses, who essentially says, why me? I don't think I'm the person who needs to do this. I don't even speak plainly. I'm not particularly eloquent. I think those kinds of stories and the eventual success of those heroes help us to feel that we can achieve something that is greater than we can imagine at the outset of the journey. And also, in every case, that there will be people who will show up to help us along the way. I think those archetypes that persist because they gratify our deepest psychological needs. I don't know if this is a good example, but in my Hogwarts Academy class, I really struggled early on with how to teach defense against the dark arts, because obviously I couldn't have students practicing Crucio on each other in the classroom. And so what I settled on, that was our art class, and I gave all the students, drawing materials essentially, and I asked them to draw their deepest fear. Because I think defense against the dark arts at a basic level is about dealing with your fears and how to overcome your fears, and how to, and what you do when you have to confront them. I think that's the whole point of the Bogart lesson, for example. And we watched the Bogart lesson when we did that class. And then I asked students to draw the thing that they were most afraid of. And I think this is in some ways a kind of a challenging lesson for 10, 11, 12-year-olds. A lot of them drew spiders and snakes and sharks and hurricanes and their houses burning down, and the kinds of things that are on the list of typical fears. But the students who really were thoughtful about that assignment, can you guess what they drew? I mean, the students who really were very honest about that. Can you guess what the greatest fear of that age group is?
Being alone?
Yeah, it's the death of their parents. They drew cemeteries with their parents' names on tombstones, not their own death, but the death of their parents. And when you think about it, which of these heroes is not alone or nearly alone?
Yeah.
Frodo's parents have been killed in a boating accident. We're told Harry's parents have been killed by Voldemort. Katniss Everdeen has a mother, but she's ineffectual. She's not a person who functions in any significant way that is helpful to Katniss. Again and again and again, so many of these figures, start out as parentless. And we talked about the fact that part of the point of the Bogart lesson is acknowledging your fear, that the first step is acknowledging what your fear is, being honest about that. And then we talk about why that's such a great fear for young people in that particular age group. My guess is if I asked my college students to draw their greatest fear, that's not what they would draw. They're more afraid of things like not being successful, not being able to support themselves, because they're older. They've gotten past that stage. But many heroes, there are exceptions like Moses, but many heroes start out in their journey at about the same age as the kids in my Hogwarts Academy class. So for those students, you may be familiar with Katherine Grimes's essay in the Ivory Tower and Harry Potter is fairy tale prince, real boy, and archetypal hero. Catherine's argument is that for those young people who were really close to Harry's age, who may have been 10 or 11 when the Harry Potter books started coming out, or who might be 10 and 11 when they start reading them, a lot of the things that happen to Harry are happening in their lives. They're having to deal with teachers who don't seem to like them, who seem to prefer other students over them. They're starting to have feelings for people they're romantically interested in and don't know what to do about that. Other students pick on them, and they have to think about how to respond without embarrassing themselves or without being teased by other students. So for students of that particular age, despite the magic, a lot of what's going on in Harry's life is pretty real to them. When I put together the Hunger Games collection, I read a very interesting essay in the New Yorker about the appeal of dystopia to the YA reading audience. And the author of that essay said, essentially, adolescence itself is a dystopia. When you're an adolescent, you feel like the world's kind of falling apart and there's not so much you can do about it. And whatever you're feeling in the moment is going to be true forever. And if there's something wrong in your life, everybody knows it, right? Because we have adolescent egocentrism. We think everybody knows what's going on with us. So, for that particular age group, I think the fantasy and the magic is appealing, but I also think there's something really realistic about those experiences that resonates with those young readers. And I think, older people read the series differently, especially older people who've read a lot of literature and who read those archetypes consciously and not subconsciously.
Absolutely. And I'm one of those students who I literally grew up with the Harry Potter novels. So I remember resonating with Harry and resonating with Hermione and Ron as they went through. And now I have a completely different perspective now that I'm an adult and I'm going back to these novels. So this is, it's very cyclical, in the hero's journey is, the way Campbell puts it, it is very cyclical. And I think that's in your exercise for defense against the dark arts is very valuable. And immediately what popped into my mind is exactly what Harry would have seen if the Boggart had come out. And, of course, Lupin's first reaction is, oh, wouldn't you have seen Voldemort? And Harry says, no, I would have been a Dementor.
Right.
Which, speaks to, as Lupin says, his wisdom that it's not what he's afraid of is fear itself.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And in terms of that cyclical nature of the hero's journey, I think it's in the Four Quartets that T.S. Eliot wrote those lines about how the point of adventuring is to return to the place where you started from and to know the place for the first time. It's like what happens to Gilgamesh at the end of the Epic of Gilgamesh, when he gets back to Uruk and he looks at this magnificent city that he's built, but he sees it differently because he's had that experience.
Exactly. And, if you look at the Chronicles of Narnia, I remember, I went through my own issues as a kid, and I would say to my mom, I wish I could go to Narnia. And she would say to me, well, sure, you could go to Narnia, but remember, the kids came back. Right. The kids always came back. So what are you going to do if you leave and you're going to come back? How is it going to change you? And I still haven't quite answered that question yet, but I still want to go to Narnia. I still want to peek into my closet every so often.
And that's another great example of a fantasy series where you have the really close proximity of the fantasy world to the real world.
Exactly. You've kind of answered this question a little already, but what is the value of fantasy, particularly in the classroom? In our current world, and to many of students who might be coming into Ferrum as either in the honors program or otherwise, college is a place to get a degree, learn the skills for employment. So then how is reading Harry Potter going to get somebody a job? It's a very Dursley, I've said it before, but it's a very Dursley-ish attitude, but it's a common attitude. This is, the point of college is to get a degree so you can get a job. So why read Harry Potter? Why read fantasy? Why read dystopian novels?
That's an increasing tension in higher education because students' parents want them to be business majors so they'll make a lot of money, or, if they're athletes, they often major in health and human performance because they want to work in fitness or maybe go to graduate school in physical therapy or something like that. But, if you look at surveys, we say this a lot in our recruiting for our program. If you look at surveys about the skills employers are looking for, They don't say they're looking for students who can make a lot of money, or they're looking for students who are really capable with technology. They say they want people with solid oral and written communication skills. That's always at the very top of what employers are looking for. And I really stress in my college class, I really stress the importance not only of being able to write about literature, but being able to talk about it. The project I described earlier, when I asked students to pick a hero myth of their own and to apply the theory from our course to that they don't write a paper in conjunction with that assignment. They give a presentation to the class, and then there's a question on the final exam that requires them to draw on some of those presentations that they have heard. I think that there is really a direct correlation between individuals' critical thinking skills and their ability to process texts, whether those texts are books or films or musical compositions or whatever. I mean, I think that skill is really important, probably more important now than previously, because we have evolved into a kind of a culture where I think we're education is so skills based. Higher education these days is very much about things like micro credentials, and at least on my campus, it is. And moving away, I think, from liberal arts concepts like critical thinking skills and quantitative reasoning skills. And if those kinds of what are sometimes perceived as soft skills, I guess, if those are lost from the curriculum, I think that'll be really sad. And we as a society will change. I've been thinking about climate change a lot because of the meeting that's going on in Dubai this week, where the global community is looking at climate change issues. My minister's wife, who is one of my colleagues in environmental science, is at that meeting. My niece, who works for a congressman, is at that meeting. And, if we're going to solve problems like climate change, we've got to read fantasy literature. We have to know science, obviously, but we also have to have the kind of imagination to come up with solutions to those problems.
Exactly. I mean, how are we going to, if we can't envision isn't most dystopian literature imagining what will happen if we don't solve these problems?
I think it is.
I
think it is. And if you look at the history of dystopian literature, it really emerged for the first time between the First and Second World War.
Yeah.
With the Russian novel We by Evgeny Zamyatin, and then Brave New World in about 1932, and then a little bit later, 1948. And, in terms of young adult dystopian literature, I think that really accelerates again after the September 11th attacks. But there's almost always a direct correspondence between those kinds of dangers in the world and the surge of fantasy literature. And that's really interesting to me.
It is, yeah.
It's a little anecdote that I think really indicates the way that young adults process that. In Daniel Nexon's book, Daniel Nexon Teaches or Taught International Relations at Georgetown University, and he has a book called Harry Potter and International Relations, I think. There's a story, it's either in that book or maybe in his blog, I can't remember where he wrote it, but he said that the morning after Osama bin Laden was assassinated, he was aware, teaching at Georgetown, he was aware that there had been a lot of people congregating outside the gates at the White House. I think that President Obama was going to have a press conference late that night around 11 or something. And so the following morning, Daniel Nexon asked his students, did any of you go down to the White House last night? And one of them said, of course. I mean, they got Voldemort.
Wow.
So, that's a good example of the way that fantasy worlds and real world events intersect, and the way that young people who've grown up reading the Harry Potter series process those real world events through the lens of fantasy literature.
Yeah. They were able to put a face to the fear. They were able to put an image to the fear that was otherwise not concrete, that otherwise was abstract for them. So that's incredible.
It's a profound influence. Jack Gierzinski, who's the author of Harry Potter and the Millennials, attributes the election of Barack Obama in part to the fact that the generation of young people who grew up reading the Harry Potter novels voted for the first time in a presidential election.
Yeah.
The first time Barack Obama was elected.
I believe that. If I could go back a little bit, what do you think, you've touched on this a little bit already, but what do you think are some of the insights and conclusions that have really stuck with you that your students have drawn from Harry Potter and from your courses? What are some of the insights that really stick out to you?
Boy, that's a tough question. Wish I'd had time to make a list for you of those. One thing that comes to mind just off the top of my head is that we had a lengthy conversation in my course this fall about Gollum. And about the conversation that Gandalf has with Frodo about pity, and whether or not Gollum is deserving of mercy. Reminds me of that scene in Prisoner of Azkaban when Harry has the opportunity to kill Peter Pettigrew, when he finds out that Peter Pettigrew was the secret keeper and that he's betrayed James and Lily Potter. And Harry says, I don't reckon my father would want me to become a killer just for his sake. I mean, I guess it ties in with that conversation Harry has with Dumbledore about choices, which, as you know, is one of my very favorite quotations from the series. I use it in my email signature and have for years. The point that the kinds of decisions, I think this is a thing that my students learn from these works, that the decisions people have to make in those moments are the ones that are really directly relevant to our character and to who we are, to the kind of individuals that we want to be. So I think I'm not suggesting necessarily that they're reading those fantasy works the way we read like self-help manuals or anything like that. But I think there is a kind of morally instructive aspect of that. And I think we have the opportunity to talk about things like that when they're in the context of fantasy literature without arguing, in a way that might be hard to do in a conversation in a political science classroom. If you can imagine a conversation about, for example, whether we should show mercy to Osama bin Laden, for example, it's a whole lot easier to talk about whether to extend mercy to Gollum, right, or to Peter Pettigrew, or to Coriolanus Snow, for that matter, than it is to talk about real world people. So, there's an aspect of those discussions that I think is, I don't know if safer is the right word. It's less perilous when you're talking about fantasy literature than it is when you're talking about the real world.
Agreed. It's to use, it's safer as in there are lower, the stakes aren't as high because Osama bin Laden was a real person, but Coriolanus Snow, he's safe inside the novel. Our decisions aren't going to, our mercy is not going to affect him. It's only the author's mercy, I suppose, that would affect him. But I do love putting characters on trial for my students. I've had groups who have asked that very question of Gollum, and I had a student who said, nope, he's going in the fire pit, no mercy for him, none whatsoever. And I'm like, okay, why? And he just went absolutely on and on and on, and other students were going, but that's not nice, that's not kind. And he was this student was a total Sam in that moment. He had no pity whatsoever for Gollum. And it was just really interesting to see what it was and he was so emphatic about it. And I suppose it's because he felt safe to share that opinion with me and with his classmates.
And when you listen to your students making arguments like that, you're really learning far more about your students than you are about Gollum.
Oh, yes, absolutely. We know enough about Gollum, but we're learning about how these students can apply their critical thinking skills, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And if you could choose any character in any fantasy or pop culture story to be your teacher or to be your mentor, who would you choose? This is my favorite question to ask.
Yeah, I'm thinking only in the context of Harry Potter right now. Well, I think it would be really fun to choose Merlin because Merlin can turn you into animals. And, I would not want Merlin to turn me into a predator because I don't think I would enjoy that experience at all.
No.
But I really love Albus Dumbledore, partially because he's not this great, perfect wizard. He's a deeply flawed human being. And I think the way that he carries his pain from the trauma of his past, the guilt that he feels about Ariana's death, his family trauma, that really resonates with me because I think most of us are the people other people think we are. And simultaneously the person we know we are in our own hearts, who seldom measures up to the person other people think we are. However, my concern about having Dumbledore as my teacher is those long periods in which he keeps things from Harry. I mean, Order of the Phoenix is a deeply frustrating book because there's such long periods of time when Harry is just clueless about what's going on with Dumbledore. And I think trust is so important in a student-teacher relationship that I think I would find it really difficult to deal with that kind of thing. I also thought a lot about saying McGonagall when you asked me that question, but we just don't have as much experience, even in 7 volumes of the Harry Potter series, with really seeing McGonagall in the classroom. So I guess I'd say Dumbledore for that reason.
Have you read Kate Glassman's essay in Open at the Close on McGonagall?
I have not yet. I have that book, but I have not read it yet.
Oh, it's brilliantly crafted because it's all about McGonagall and how brilliant she is. But you're right. And Kate Glassman makes the point that there's just not enough of McGonagall in the series and there should be more. But I definitely appreciate your insight about Dumbledore because there are those who would say, but he doesn't talk to Harry. He doesn't, he keeps secrets from Harry. And that is a deeply troubling aspect of Dumbledore. But for the longest time, a lot of us were saying, pro Dumbledore, we love Dumbledore as a teacher. He's a great mentor. And in some cases he really is a great mentor to Harry. But as you say, nobody's perfect and teachers, we're human beings first.
There are a couple of works that have come out over the last few years as I've been finishing this anthology that I've just edited that I've kind of had to set aside, and I'm really just looking forward now to getting through those. Open at the Close is one. I have read Cecilia's introduction to that work, and I read Tolanda Henderson's essay because I needed to draw on that in writing the introduction, writing about the current state of rolling studies. And Beth Sutton Ramspeck's essay as well. I read some chapters actually from that book as Beth was working on it, but I haven't read the whole thing. So
now that you're putting the editing hat down, you can put the reading hat back on.
I need to catch up. And I've also recently become a lot more interested in Cormoran's Strike. I mean, I have always been an avid reader of the Cormoran's Strike series. I have not been as interested in criticism. But Louise Freeman, who knows me well and who knows that one of the ways to get me interested in anything is to talk about true crime, recently asked me about the fact to what extent I thought Rowling was drawing on real killers, especially in recent British history with some of the characters in the Cormoran Strike series. So I'm getting more interested in that as well.
Louise knows you well. Louise knows you well. So we've got your essay in Potterversity. The Ivory Tower Part 2 is coming out. Do you have any other projects or publications that you like to share with your listeners or past works that you like to share?
I actually wrote an essay about teaching the Harry Potter series for an anthology that Cecilia Contrafaro was working on a few years ago. And there's an interesting story about that, which Cecilia allowed me to write about in the introduction to the Ivory Tower, Harry Potter and Beyond. That is that she was approached by the Modern Language Association. They have a series called Teaching World Literature, I think, and they approached her about editing a volume on Harry Potter. And the contributors got to the point of submitting a revision. The essays were written, we'd revised the essays, and the MLA pulled the plug on the project.
Boo.
And offered Cecilia an explanation that was sort of euphemistic, I think. My impression, and I think Cecilia's distinct impression, was that they decided they didn't want to be involved with Rowling anymore. This happened about, I think the controversy with Maya Forstater began in December of 2019. This was in April of 2020, I think, that Cecilia exchanged this correspondence with the MLA. So I don't know what Cecilia's plans are for that anthology at this point, but I certainly hope something comes of it because I wanted to read those essays.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm getting ready to work on another true crime project. My doctoral dissertation is on American 20th century novels that are inspired by actual crimes. In Cold Blood by Truman Capote was kind of my starting point with that project. And I've just been asked to contribute an essay to a collection specifically about Capote's career. So I'll be going back to true crime for a while in the next few months.
Hooray. I'm happy to hear that. So the Teaching Harry Potter, was that the one edited by Valerie Frankel?
She had an essay about teaching the Harry Potter series, but Cecilia was also working on a similar anthology about teaching approaches to the Harry Potter. That's the one. It's Cecilia's anthology that the MLA pulled the plug on. I do have an essay in Valerie Frankel's book as well, and it is primarily about teaching the Harry Potter novels to two different academic levels.
Okay, so the one that Cecilia Contrafaro was trying to work on, that one was pulled. Darn it. All right, we got to find another spot for that one then.
I think Cecilia's anthology is tabled. I haven't asked her recently what happened with that, but I really hope it appears.
I do too, because teaching Harry Potter, it's important. All right, thank you, Lana, so much for coming on Teaching with Magic and for taking the time to talk to me. I'm really excited, and I'm so glad I got to talk to you. And I am crossing my fingers that I am able to attend Chestnut Hill Harry Potter Conference this fall. We'll see how my work schedule matches up.
I hope to be there myself, and I'm really grateful to you for inviting me, and I've enjoyed our conversation today.
Thank you.
Listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to hit the subscribe button on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or your other favorite podcast feeds. If you enjoyed listening, please leave a rating and a review as well. You can read and find out more about Teaching with Magic by visiting our website, teachingwithmagic.blog. You can leave a message on our podcast page, read past Teaching with Magic posts, and check out our book lists on our affiliate page. We also invite you to support us on Patreon. You'll have access to bonus material, our Discord channel, live Q&As, and you'll get a sneak peek at future products such as lesson plans, worksheets, and other teaching tools. The link is always available in our show notes and the podcast page on our website. Thanks again for joining us, and as always, keep making magic.